Hey, my name is Caitlin Malone and welcome back to my true crime channel. Today's case is a very disturbing and difficult one that involves a baby. So if you're sensitive to that sort of thing, I don't recommend watching this video. I have a bunch of other videos that may interest you. Today's case is on the death of baby Sterling, whose parents Cheyanne Harris and Zachary Koehn left him to die in a baby swing, not changing him, not feeding him, not taking care of him from anywhere from 9 to 14 days. And he would later be found rotting and covered in maggots. So let's talk about the parents for a little bit so we can kind of get an idea of who they are. So I couldn't find much about Cheyanne's upbringing, but I did find a bunch about Zachary's. Zachary Koehn was actually raised in a Mennonite community by adoptive parents. And from Zachary himself, he grew up in a loving, stable environment, in a home where he was well taken care of. It seems that he was kicked out around 16 years old from drinking and smoking. And as everyone knows, that's normally something that's frowned upon in the Mennonite and Amish communities, and it kind of makes sense that he was kicked out because of these things. At 17, he claims to have taken up truck driving for a company that delivered slurry, which is actually liquid manure. It was there that he was actually introduced to meth as an alternative to caffeine pills to try to keep himself awake on the long drives. Years later, he would end up marrying a woman named Sherry, and they would have a son together, only to divorce. And that child decided to live with Zachary's parents. Around 2014 is when Zachary and Cheyanne start dating. Now, Zachary is 25 years old at this point, and Cheyanne is only 17, which is a whole other subject in itself. I don't think a 25-year-old had any business being with a 17-year-old, but that is just my opinion. And it would only be about a year later in 2017 when Cheyanne would give birth to their first child, a daughter that they would name Nala. Now, from all accounts, it seems that Nala was pretty well taken care of and she wasn't neglected. Now, there will be some statements later on that kind of make me question that, but from as far as we know, she was alive, she was being fed. She at least wasn't neglected the way that we will find out baby Sterling was. May not be the standard level of care that she may have needed, but it was at least enough care that she is still alive till this day and she was thriving. So at this point in time, they were now in Louisiana and Zachary was driving for a number of different truck companies. In Zachary's later testimony, he would say it was Cheyanne's idea to move back to Iowa, and they eventually would, and they moved back to Zachary's hometown of Riceville, Iowa. So it's now 2016. Zachary and Cheyanne are living in Riceville, and Zachary ends up introducing Cheyanne to meth. Now, I'm not 100% sure if she was introduced back before when they met when she was 17, and if she did meth or not when she was pregnant with Nala or afterwards. And on top of that, I'm not 100% sure if she did any drugs prior to meeting Zachary or didn't. But as far as we know, Zachary was the one that introduced her to doing meth. And it turns out that while they were doing it, Cheyanne realized that she was pregnant with her second child, aka baby Sterling. From everything that was noted, Cheyanne was on meth for her entire pregnancy with baby Sterling. And Zachary claims that she'd be hard to deal with if she wasn't. That claim is just, you're the one that introduced her to meth, and then she's addicted to it, and now she's pregnant, and then you're blaming her for being irritable when she doesn't get meth is just, I don't know. Obviously, she's going to be irritable if she doesn't have it. She's withdrawing. Either way, Sterling would end up being born 2 weeks early in the bathtub of a friend's home. Sterling and Cheyanne would only be transferred to hospital after his birth. And not surprisingly, they ended up testing the blood from his umbilical cord, and it ended up coming back positive for methamphetamines. Now, this is my big hang up with this entire story, and it is why and at what point baby Sterling was allowed back into the custody of Cheyanne and Zachary after testing positive for methamphetamines. And it is completely reflective of another case, the baby Dillon case, where baby Dillon was also born to parents who were addicted to drugs, and they ended up actually faking their drug tests, and the system allowed baby Dillon back into the care of his parents, and they ended up killing him. They blamed it due to their drug use as well. So it's just crazy to me that there's two cases, both with babies who are around the same age, whose parents were both addicted to drugs, and the system really did fail these children. I just can't comprehend how they allowed baby Sterling back to them, let alone didn't take Nala away from them as well. But maybe this is a factor in this, but a few weeks after Sterling was born, they ended up packing everything up and moving to an even smaller town, a town by the name of Alta Vista, Iowa, that has a population of around 250 people. Again, Zachary got another job as a truck driver, and this job involved him hauling chickens to the tri-state area. And he claims that at this point he was working about 70 to 80 hours a week. He was still using meth at this point, and his excuse for using meth at this time was still to stay awake while he was driving. Zachary admitted that during this time, if he was home, he was pretty pretty much asleep the entire time. And he was asleep because of the long hours on the road and the meth use, and so if he wasn't at work, he was at home asleep. He also admitted that he never changed Sterling's diaper his entire life. And he said the reason for this was because he had a weak stomach. This man claimed to have only changed one diaper between 2 of his children. Now, I'm not counting his first child. I'm assuming he also never changed any diapers for his first child. I'm sorry, but I don't care if you have a weak stomach. Honestly, I'd say to suck it the fuck up. You made the decision to have children, and now you have to step up to the plate and take care of them the way that they're needed to be taken care of. Like, I understand it may make you gag, but like, pull yourself together. You're a parent now. Either way, Zachary claimed during the trial that he had made an agreement with Cheyanne that she would be changing all the diapers. I would love to say, how can you pick up your baby and realize that they're dirty and not change them? But here's another kicker. Zachary claims that he never held baby Sterling. He would just leave the baby laying there all the time. He didn't cuddle him, he never fed him, bathe him, play with him, nothing. Meanwhile, Zachary was feeding their dog, taking their dog outside for walks when it needed it, giving it water, playing with the dog. He was taking care of the dog, but not taking care of his baby. That means that the only person that was caring for Sterling and Nala was now Cheyanne, who was at this point 21 years old, again on meth and suffering from postpartum depression. Now, at some point in July 2017, a neighbor named Jennifer Shriver babysat Sterling. Shriver said that the first time she babysat them, Cheyanne left a now 3-month-old Sterling and 2-year-old Nala with her for 17 hours. Jennifer Shriver said that Sterling had a raw diaper rash, he seemed underweight, and that he ate very hungrily. And she apparently babysat them one other time. Now, I'm assuming the next time she babysat him, she would have noticed if he still had a diaper rash or not, and if he was still underweight and hungry. Why wouldn't she report this to someone is my question. It's also at this time that Zachary befriended another truck driver named Jordan Clark. And he said during this friendship that Zachary mentioned multiple times about having a daughter, but he never mentioned a baby son. Jordan also claimed to have done drugs at Cheyanne and Zachary's apartment, and that he visited around 2 or 3 times around July 2017. Jordan says that they would go into Zachary and Cheyanne's bedroom so that they could smoke meth and Nala wouldn't see them, but that he never entered the second bedroom, he never heard a baby cry, he never heard them ever talk about a baby, but he did see Nala every time he was over. And he also claims that he's seen Cheyanne play and feed Nala on multiple occasions, but again, never a baby. At this point, Sterling is now 4 months old. Zachary claims that he also never fed Sterling the last 2 weeks of his life because he was always asleep when he was home. And he claims that he never knew that Cheyanne wasn't feeding him, only that he wasn't bulking up. According to Zachary, Cheyanne's mother just said that Sterling was stretching out, and says that Cheyanne never expressed any concern that Sterling wasn't gaining any weight. That's another thing I don't understand, if Cheyanne's mother was also interacting with the children and realized that Sterling was having a diaper rash, he was underweight. I'm also assuming that she knew about their drug use, because we'll find out later on that some other family members reported that they knew about the drug use. I just don't understand. Maybe because I thought Nala was being taken care of, Nala seemed okay, that I thought that Sterling was also okay. I just don't understand how in all these cases so many people failed these children. From what is known, Sterling was in that second bedroom from anywhere from 9 to 14 days, sitting alone in a mechanical baby swing, staring at a wall, again alone, in a hot room, not being fed, not being changed, not being cuddled. He was sitting in a soiled diaper, starving to death. And he would be left like that for up to 2 weeks. So on August 29th, Jordan claims to have went to work around 5 p.m. and returned home at about 4 a.m. on the 30th. Once home, he says he relaxed for a bit, he played Bejeweled on his phone, and then he says Nala woke up, so he made her something to eat. It isn't until around 6 a.m. that he claims to have gone to sleep. Then around noon, Zachary says that he's woken up by Cheyanne, who falls to her knees at the foot of his bed and is crying hysterically.
She came into the foot of the bed there, and I was sleeping, and she dropped to her knees and was crying hysterically and kept saying, "He's gone, he's gone."
When you say she, who is she?
Cheyanne.
And you said she was crying hysterically?
Yes.
How do you know that she was crying?
I assumed it was crying. She couldn't speak for a while. She was distraught. And yeah, I had to ask her quite a few times questions so she would actually answer that I could understand.
When she was crying and upset, did she tell you what happened?
She had said, "He's gone, and then I asked, "Who's gone?" And she's like, "Sterling."
Jordan then says that he jumped out of bed and ran to the second bedroom to see. He claims that when he went up to baby Sterling in that baby swing, he touched his forehead and he was cold. He also noticed that there was blood coming from his mouth. can't imagine going into that bedroom and not really thinking something was immediately wrong just from the smell alone. We're gonna find out that their whole entire house reeked. So maybe they were just used to the smell at this point, but I just can't imagine it. From there, Jordan says that he couldn't get any phone signal inside the house to call 911, so he walked around the apartment for a bit, couldn't get service, so then he wandered outside and eventually got service and was able to call 911. This is super strange because as far as I know, you can use your phone to call 911 whether you have any service or not. You can use Wi-Fi. Apparently, even if you don't have a specific carrier, it'll pick up to a different carrier, and you can call 911 from pretty much anywhere. That's the whole point of it. You don't need to specifically have great service to be able to call 911. It could be possible because they were in such a small town, the service could have been terrible. I've been in big cities where the service is terrible, so it kind of just depends. But for 911, apparently it's supposed to go through. I don't know. So Zachary claims he's woken up around noon. Well, it isn't until around 12:55 p.m. that the 911 call is placed.
Sauk County 911.
This is Zach Coehn. The ambulance sent out here to my apartment.
Okay, what's your address, Zach?
107 South Hilltop Avenue in Alta Vista.
Okay, what's going on?
Around 9, my girlfriend went to feed our son, and then about 11 or 11:30, she went to check on him, and he was gone.
Gone meaning?
He died.
Okay.
He's like probably 4 months. I don't know if it's sudden death syndrome or what.
Okay, so you live at 107 South Hilltop in Alta Vista? What,
Apartment 7.
Apartment 7? Okay, and your son is 4 months old, and the last time that you was checked on was 9?
No, it was she fed him at 9.
Okay.
And she hadn't heard him, she went to check on him, hadn't heard him cry or whatever, and so probably about 11:30, 11:40, she went to check on him. He passed away.
In this 911 phone call, Zachary claims that Cheyanne fed Sterling around 9 a.m. that day and he was completely fine, but then when she went back to check on him around 11:30, he was dead, which we will get to how that's completely untrue, but I'm sure you understand at this point that it was. I don't know whether Zachary just made this up or it's what he just assumed Cheyanne did, or if it's what she said she did and she was lying. I'm not 100% sure. Drugs can make you do pretty crazy things. Things you may not have done if you weren't on them. But because they're in a small town, the police don't just like immediately get there. The 911 operator notified a volunteer first responder, and that was Tony Frederick, and she was at the apartment within minutes. I think the best way to explain this is to just let her explain it in her own words on how this all unfolded.
I pulled right up and I saw a man, a woman, and a little girl, and I got on my car and I went running up to them and said, "Where's the baby?" Nobody was showing any emotion, and the man goes inside, and I said, "Show me." And so he took me inside. We walked in and we went to the back bedroom. He took me to the back bedroom, and it was dark and it was stuffy, and there was a stench of urine there. I was looking for a crib. I couldn't see a crib. I said, "Where's the baby?" And he said, "In the swing." And it was dark. I said, "We've got to get some lights on in here. Turn the lights on." And he flipped the switch and the lights came on. And he walked away and he muttered something, and I don't know what he muttered.
What did you see when the lights came on?
Well, you could see the swing. It was facing an outside wall in the corner. Went over so I could see Sterling to do my assessment, look, listen, and feel. His eyes were fixed and dilated, staring straight out. He had blood around his mouth, and I went to check a brachial pulse on him, and his arm was stiff and rigid and cold. All of his extremities were cold. His little feet were cold. His hands were clenched in a fist, and he wasn't breathing, and his clothes were like crusty.
So Cheyanne was overcome with grief and bawling her eyes out, according to Zachary, but then when help arrives, they're all just like stone cold and like very uncaring. No one's screaming for them to go help the baby. No one is rushing them inside. No one. Everyone is just standing there, and Tony Frederick had to like urge them to tell her where baby Sterling was. In my opinion, I don't think that any of them were very concerned about Sterling from the day he was born. Now, this may have been because they were on drugs. Nala was alive and she wasn't abused like Sterling was. There's nothing that I read that said that they were this heavily into their drug addiction when Nala was born or during the pregnancy with Nala. Either way, baby Sterling would be pronounced dead, and his cause of death would eventually be ruled because of E. coli, dehydration, and malnutrition. Sterling was under 7 pounds when he was found deceased at 4 months old. Now, what I'm about to describe is very graphic, but it is the reality of everything. His diaper rash was so bad that it had eaten through his skin and caused E. coli from the feces entering his bloodstream. Then flies laid eggs in his diaper, causing maggots to crawl around it for days before he died. He was starved to death on top of that. Sterling was sitting in that diaper for so long that the rash went all the way up his back and was literally eating his skin. Even the feces had started to decay, according to the autopsy. Witnesses at the apartment said the entire place smelled like urine and feces. Sterling would have been crying constantly. If you've ever had a baby, knew a baby, met a baby, even seen a video with a baby, baby's cries are very piercing and loud. He would have been constantly crying from being soiled, from being hungry, from being thirsty, from just wanting to be picked up. No one helped him and no one cared. I really wonder if Nala ever brought up like, oh, I can hear the baby crying, or like, where's Sterling? Like, she was 2 or 3 years old at this point. She was old enough to understand. She was being fed, she was being cared for, she was being played with. Sterling was sitting in that bedroom. Well, what I don't understand with this is after Sterling's death and his discovery, no one was arrested, and they would not be arrested until months after. From what I read, it seems that they both underwent some sort of substance treatment afterwards. At one point in October 3rd, Zachary posted on a social media account that he was enjoying the clean life, and Cheyanne ended up moving in with her mother back in Riceville, and it seems that she also started getting treatment for PTSD. So after all of that, Cheyanne and Zachary wouldn't be arrested until October 25th, 2017. Again, I'm not sure why. Maybe there's a reasoning somewhere out there. If you know, please let me know down below. I'm very curious about why it took so long for them to be arrested, when I've seen many other people be arrested for much less. So before we get into some points about the trial, I just want to point out some people that knew the couple and brought up some things afterwards. Seems that their drug use was a known thing. Zachary Koehn's brother Danny admitted at a vigil for Sterling that he knew the couple had drug problems. So people knew about their drug habits. The hospital even allowed baby Sterling to be released into their custody. Like, I just don't understand how no one intervened. And the thing is, this is an ongoing thing in society. We've seen it in other cases like Baby Brianna, Gabriel Fernandez. Again, baby Dillon is sick. But that's exactly why I'm bringing up this case and bringing up this issue, because it's still an ongoing thing. Danny was also quoted saying, "I talked to Zach a lot. He did have some concerns about the child being taken care of while he was gone. He'd call and say the baby wasn't changed for a week when he wasn't home." But then he continued to say that he's not trying to say that Zachary's innocent or that he shouldn't be taking responsibility for everything that happened. Right there, that statement says that it is known that baby Sterling was not being properly cared for. If your brother's calling you up saying that, oh, the baby wasn't changed for a week, someone should have been calling someone to get help for this baby. And no one did. Neighbors in the building also reported that they rarely seen the couple. One neighbor who had an 11-month-old baby at the time also claimed that they knew that there was a baby in there. They claimed that they knew that Zachary and Cheyanne had a baby, but that they pretty much never seen him. But from all the interviews, it seems that the neighbors were all extremely disgusted that this ended up happening, which everyone should be. I just can't understand the family not doing anything when they literally are admitting that they knew something was extremely wrong. Prosecution pushed that Zachary didn't care about Sterling because when he was born there were questions of whether or not Zachary was the father of Sterling. Okay, and my thing with this is it seems ridiculous. Now, I can't say that Sterling was 100% Zachary's child, but I just can't get behind comparing the looks of a child compared to yourself. Obviously, there are times when it would be very obvious that the child isn't yours. But there's a trend going around on TikTok where people that are especially like different skin tones or different ethnicities talk about what they thought their children would look like, and then they show photos of their children and their children look completely different than them. And that is just because of genes, genetics. The child may look extremely like one parent but not like the other parent at all. It may look like a blend of the parents. So whereas Nala and Zachary's first child may have had his darker skin tone and looked much like him, Sterling might just have really looked like Cheyanne, who had a very light complexion. I just don't see that as a good excuse. Now, that might just because they don't know about that. I honestly didn't really know about that 100% until I seen the videos on TikTok, because I always thought that they say like people with darker skin tones or say brown eyes have stronger genes, and so the children most likely will look like that person. But that's not always the case. And the prosecution ate this up. In return, his defense brought up that he only had an 8th grade level of education, and they tried to play this kind of factor where they said he was brought up in a Mennonite community where men and women had like their roles. Men worked and women took care of the house and the children. Basically trying to say that he didn't know taking care of Sterling was his responsibility. Yet let's remind everyone that he took care of the dog and he took care of Nala. He admitted that he even made food for Nala, but he couldn't feed a baby apparently. Again, this was all shot down. Remember, I keep bringing up that Nala was taken care of at least to some form. She had been raised to about 2 or 3 years old, so she wasn't left for weeks in a swing like he was. So he clearly knew how to take care of a baby and a child to at least some degree. And Zachary actually ended up agreeing in court that he did know how to take care of a baby and his upbringing had nothing to do with it. And they again brought up that his dog was taken care of better than the baby was. The entire trial, Zachary basically just kept bringing up that he put his trust in the wrong person, basically just blaming Cheyanne for everything. Okay, so Cheyanne's trial. So Cheyanne would end up admitting that she was using meth for pretty much a week straight up to Sterling's death. And they bring up that she had postpartum depression and they argued intoxication. Postpartum depression is a very serious thing, and we've seen many cases where postpartum depression is the cause, and they use it as the argument to why specifically a mother would do something to their child that is horrific. Now, postpartum depression is a hugely important thing that I honestly think women need more help with, and I think it needs to be less stigmatized and talked about more often. Her attorney presented that the monster in the trial was not Cheyanne, but that it was depression and substance abuse. She claimed that Cheyanne wasn't evil and that she did not murder Sterling. Now, in my opinion, I completely agree that mental health, postpartum, intoxication from drugs is definitely a huge deciding factor in this, and it is definitely, I think, the reason that this ended up happening. And it is possible that Cheyanne was introduced to meth when she was 17 from a 25-year-old, but I would not state that she did not murder him. I know a lot of people will just look at her and look at this case and say, she's evil, she should be thrown in a hole for the rest of her life. But I really like to play devil's advocate and look at all of the different factors and not just condemn someone 100%, even though this is an extremely vile crime that happened and should not have happened. But we do have to look at the past and what led up to this to cause this to happen. She had been smoking meth long before she had postpartum, though I'm sure that medicating using it was the excuse used during the trial. In my opinion, none of that is a valid excuse for leaving a 4-month-old alone to die in a bedroom. There was no reason Sterling needed to die. In the trial, it is also noted that Cheyanne was now sober and that she broke down when having to relive and look at the photos of Sterling deceased in that mechanical baby swing, which is definitely different than the response that was given to the first responder when she showed up at the home trying to help baby Sterling, and all of them were just stone cold and uncaring. So Cheyanne ended up also losing parental rights to Nala, and Nala was put into foster care as far as I know. I'm not quite sure why a family member didn't take her, but from all accounts of none of them reporting any of this, honestly, maybe it is better that she's in foster care. And on top of that, court records show that they tested Nala's hair and that it came back positive for methamphetamine. So I'm not sure what that means, if she was just in that environment so much that she was exposed to it and somehow ingested or took it, or if they had her take it. I'm not honestly quite sure. there's not much said about that. So on November 6th, 2018, Zachary Koehn was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And on February 6th of 2019, Cheyanne Harris was also found guilty of the exact same charges. Now, I found this very interesting. Last year in 2020, a BBC documentary was released called Locked Up with the Lifers, and Cheyanne Harris ended up being in it. I'm just gonna play the clip so you can see it for yourself and see Cheyanne how she is now. I just found it very interesting.
Less than a year into her life sentence.
What are you looking at?
I want to know why she's struggling. Why have they moved you up to this ward?
Because I got into my first altercation.
Physical fight?
Yeah.
Why?
This girl, she made a comment that was directed directly towards my charge and why I'm here, and yeah, I turned around and beat the shit out of her.
What did she say that made you so angry?
She said, "Yeah, bitch, that's why you killed your son."
Did you kill your son? The courts clearly thought that you were responsible.
If I hadn't been high on meth, it never would have happened. I was not a good person when I was on meth and trying to be a mom. I wasn't. He was extremely neglected.
Where did you find him?
In his room, in his swing.
How long was he left alone for?
I can't say exactly sure how long he was left alone for.
I think it was days.
It was days before I went in there.
You're clearly struggling mentally. Do you imagine this is how you will go on to exist?
I don't know. Other people here say that it gets better, that it won't be so hard, but in all reality, I think that's bullshit.
Shouldn't you hurt for the rest of your life?
Yeah, but I'll live.
Do you want to live?
Depends on the day.
It is good that it seems like she's admitting that what she did was wrong and she realizes everything she did now that she's sober. I just can't imagine doing something so horrendous and then coming down from it all, not having anything to self-medicate from, and just having to deal with everything that you did. I just can't imagine doing something like that and then having to live with it for the rest of my life. That's honestly. And it seems, according to Cheyanne, that her stay in prison has not been a good one. The inmates know her charges, and everyone knows what happens to people that hurt children and babies in jail. Another inmate named Tara told the documentary presenter, yeah, they'll fuck with her a lot because of what she's in here for. And when asked if the abuse will continue, she said, oh yeah, if not worse. Sometimes people like that, they might jump her in the bathroom. Sir Zachary's experiencing the same shit in his prison too. Some will applaud people for that. So Sterling's death ended up coming during a surge of child deaths in Iowa. The Des Moines Register investigation showed that 11 children died in 2016 from suspected child abuse. And the Child Death Review Team, operating out of the Iowa State Medical Examiner's Office, found that caregivers involved in drug use or altercations most likely caused the 7 homicides they investigated in 2013. This happens way too often. Like, it should be never. But it is way too often. And I really do hope that this video can spread awareness on this topic of child abuse, child neglect involved with drug abuse and mental health matters. Baby Sterling's case should not be a reality. But if we can take anything away from his story or any of the other babies and children's stories, I think it should be that if you suspect something, report it. Because if the system isn't going to do it and is going to release these children to these parents, and things like these are going to happen, we have to do as much as we can to try to help them. From what I found in this case, there were so many people that could have intervened. And if even one person can speak up and try to call someone and try to help, maybe we can prevent this from happening from another baby or child. Now, the entire court proceedings are all on YouTube, so I will have those linked down below if you're interested in watching them. But this case is definitely a hard one, and it is definitely a very important one. If you are still interested in watching another true crime videos, I definitely recommend watching some of my other ones. I have a bunch now. And with that, I'm going to end this video here. Yeah, this is just a really horrific one. and one that I wish I didn't have to make a video on. If there are any other cases that you want me to talk about, leave them in the comment section below and let me know your opinion on this case. And with that, I will see you in my next video.